I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. And joining me, I have the president of the Uranium Producers of America, Scott Melbye. Welcome back, Scott.
Well, hi, Mike. It's great to be on your show again, and what an exciting time to talk about nuclear energy.
Yeah, no kidding. Since we last spoke, it would appear that the Canadian government has found God and has come out pro-nuclear.
Yeah, I would say Canada's always been a leader. I mean, I think you could narrow it down to Ontario. If Ontario was its own country, given their commitment to nuclear power between Bruce, Darlington, Pickering plants, and their commitment to phase out their coal-fired generation, they've been a leader for some time. But you're clearly referring to the federal government's all-in commitment to see that nuclear is part of the decarbonization of the entire country's energy needs. And I think it's well placed. We're seeing this happening globally, where I think the transition to the green energy economy, frankly, hasn't gone very well. And I think there has been too much reliance on ideology around renewables, wind and solar, and not enough math and science. So I think that's where nuclear fits in. It's as clean and carbon-free as wind and solar, but it runs 24/7, 95% of the time. So I'm not surprised Canada's all in. It's got the uranium resources on the fuel cycle side, but clearly they want to be leaders in small modular reactors, micro reactors that are becoming such a big feature of the industry now going forward.
Yeah, most definitely. It's been often said that the Athabaska region in Northern Saskatchewan is the Saudi Arabia of uranium power. And it's nice to finally see the government acknowledge that again. I liken it back to the 60s and 70s when I was a kid growing up. It always seemed to be a point of pride in Canada that we were a leader in providing nuclear energy to other countries all over the world. And whether or not that stopped, the perception was that maybe that wasn't such a good thing, and we stopped talking about that.
Yeah, listen, it's a whole different world today. We're a more high-tech, computerized society than ever. If we truly do move to electric vehicles the way many expect us to, we're going to need to use more energy, more electrical energy, not less. And it could be as much as a doubling or tripling of our electricity needs in the developed world. And so, we better figure out our energy policies. This isn't, banning plastic straws or plastic bags. This has a profound impact on our economies, our way of life. And you're beginning to see that where energy policies have failed in Germany, in Europe more broadly, various parts of the US, California, Texas, really, you see that there's a cost to not getting this right. And so nuclear energy really fits well in that narrative. And I think these small modular reactors that Canada's taking a big lead on, so is the United States. These are the smaller 100, 200 megawatt reactors as opposed to the 1600 megawatt big units. They can be built in factories, shipped on site, lower upfront capital. If it's possible to be safer, even safer than the current generation of plants, they just have a much smaller footprint. And really, I think in developed markets and in remote locations, the applications are limitless. And we're beginning to see that now. Obviously, Darlington is the site of what will be an SMR reactor being built there with, I believe, GE Hitachi. In the United States, we're seeing them come in to replace coal-fired power plants in places like Wyoming, Idaho, Washington State, Tennessee, and elsewhere. In the UK, a major effort underway to deploy Rolls-Royce reactors, as much as 16 of them throughout England and Wales, possibly Scotland, to replace kind of their older generation of reactors that are nearing the end of their useful life. So really is a big story, and Canada's playing a big part. Chalk River Labs is doing a lot in that regard. I think also we need to talk about micro reactors, which are even smaller. There may be 2, 3, 4, 5 megawatts. And these are the type of nuclear reactors that are being developed for remote northern communities, mining operations, where we have to remember that mining companies are being pushed to carbon reduction, zero carbon targets by 2030, 2050. And frankly, big conventional open pit underground mines, very hard to run them on renewable energy alone. So these micro reactors like are being developed with companies like Ultrasafe Nuclear and others in at Chalk River and down at Idaho National Labs in the United States. Really is an enormous market, and we're beginning to. I just attended a conference, an ESG mining conference in Toronto week before last, where this dilemma is really facing large mining companies, where they've made the commitments to lower carbon or go carbon free, but some of their mines that don't benefit from hydroelectric power or very sunny environments where solar might be an option, they really need nuclear to be part of the mix, and there's a real embrace of that, which is exciting.
How far away are we from the micro reactors?
Well, we're not that far away, and perhaps oftentimes it's defense programs that really push technologies and push developments of new technologies, and we're seeing it in the Department of Defense in the United States with their Project Pele, where they're developing these 2-3 megawatt units that can be sized and fit in a shipping container and would be used for remote military bases and applications. And they're moving very quickly to have this deployed within the next 2 or 3 years. There are SMR programs in the United States, in Washington State, in Idaho and Wyoming, where the intention is to have those built and up and running in this decade, some as early as 2028. So these are not the concept cars that you used to see at the car show, where they, very cool technology, but you couldn't buy one. They're now moving from that sort of concept reality to real deployment, and they're seeing great support from the Canadian government, from the US government. I mean, ultimately, these are going to have to stand on their own feet, and they can, but those first of a kind units are always going to be the biggest challenge. When you talk to reactor vendors in this SMR market, they say the first units are the hardest, and hence why you have cost sharing between Department of Energy and the Canadian government with these first of a kind units, because they say they have hundreds, if not thousands, of orders for the second, third, and fourth units once they've been de-risked and proven that they can be built on budget and on time. So again, I think you're going to see these be as impactful as deployment of gas turbines. I mean, they're going to be that kind of numbers. I think the expectations in the United States, according to the Nuclear Energy Institute that surveyed their executive leaders, they were asked what their expectations for nuclear build out in the next 25 years. And they have an expectation for 95 gigawatts of new nuclear power installed in the United States. That's 300 small modular reactors being built in the next 25 years. So this is really changing the whole face of energy, and we have to. I mean, if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, I mean, we can question the sanity of that. I don't think we're ever going to live without natural gas, and neither that we should. It's a wonderful source of energy, especially for us here in North America. But if we want to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, nuclear is going to have to be one of the major solutions.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And so would the Ontario Power Corporation, which is the public utility in the province of Ontario. They were one of the very first groups in Canada to come out and applaud the federal government's move.
Yeah, they're real leaders in this space, and really working with not only their unit that they're building at Darlington, but also supporting these activities at Chalk River Labs to build out the micro reactors for mining applications. So OPG really a leader in this regard.
Definitely. Now, we've talked about a little bit about the US and the Canadian government. How much cooperation is actually going on cross-border between our two governments to make North America essentially self-contained within the nuclear industry?
Well, I think you're going to see more happening, and it really, we have this mega trend towards green energy that we've just talked about, but we have another massive geopolitical event, which is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. and the impacts that it has on energy security, energy independence. And we've seen the impacts on Europe, Germany, and others really moving away from Russian reliance on whether it's natural gas or nuclear fuel for reactors. I think the future really sees the West really relying on Western sources of uranium and nuclear fuel components. And I think the biggest, beneficiaries out of a very horrible chapter in human history here is that North American uranium producers really are going to be favored as stable jurisdictions. Obviously, great geology, but also very pro-mining jurisdictions. The companies that I'm affiliated with, Uranium Energy Corp, we're really focusing on our assets in Texas, Wyoming, and Saskatchewan, and that's for that very reason. These are stable pro-mining jurisdictions with great uranium resources that are only going to grow in importance in this world where, I think we'll bifurcate into Russia's world and their sphere of influence, and then everybody else. And that'll really require cooperation between the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and friendly nations that truly share our interests and values. So I think in terms of resources, I know there's been commitments made at the government to government level on critical minerals. And I think uranium obviously fits in that as well, Canada being a major supplier to the US industry down here. I think where we're going to see less supply coming in are countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia, which interesting to note that the United States gets 20% of its electricity from nuclear power. 60% of the uranium fuel that goes into those nuclear power plants comes from Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. Clearly something as my organization, Uranium Producers of America, has always warned and cautioned against, but now it's really hitting home as, whether we, through legislation in the US Congress, ban Russian imports like we did with oil, gas, and coal from Russia, or Putin cuts off the West from imports, knowing the tendency he has to weaponize energy sources, or as we're seeing already happen, utilities are just moving away from a Russian reliance. So again, I think this really puts a premium on North American supplies, energy supplies in general, and uranium specifically.
Now, given that East-West divide, how do our reserves in North America compare to those to, say, Kazakhstan and
Kazakhstan has really emerged. I mean, it's been an interesting phenomenon where the United States led world production in the 1980s. They were overtaken by Canada, largely Saskatchewan, that shift from Ontario production to Saskatchewan high-grade deposits in the Athabaska Basin. But then the Kazakhs overtook Canada, and it was at a time when uranium prices after Fukushima we're at historic lows and well below the incentive cost of Western market-driven producers. But those state-owned entities in Russia and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan really increased their production year over year, which was very troubling to Western governments because of the tendency to dump that state-owned uranium in Western markets. Obviously, Kazakhstan has enormous resources of uranium, but so does North America. The United States has 1 billion pounds of known and likely resources of uranium. Our industry is going to be dominated by in situ recovery, the lower cost, lower capital costs, environmentally less intrusive, more friendly way to mine uranium with the ISR process is going to be the bulk of our production going forward. So we shifted away from higher cost conventional mines towards the ISR. So the US really, I think, can contribute 10, 20, 25 million pounds a year of production under supportive market conditions and policies. Of course, the Athabaska Basin has always been, in my mind, the most prominent district in the world for uranium, and that's only going to be more so going forward. And you have the existing mines like McArthur River, Cigar Lake, truly world-class, but you've got other deposits like Arrow, Triple R, Rough Rider that are, will be developed either in addition to the existing mines or as replacement of those resources as they're mined out. So this is truly going to be a decade and many decades forward of North American uranium production. I'm a big believer in that.
In order to make that happen, what are we having to look at for a base price for the actual uranium, so it's economically feasible?
We have seen uranium prices because of this supply squeeze that we see happening, that the producer discipline that really has been occurring over the last 7 to 8 years in countries like the US, Canada, Australia, Africa, all cutting back production, has really rebalanced the uranium market to a point where the gap was being made up by secondary supplies and inventories, obviously very significant because they've been meeting the gap now for many years. But we're now at a point where that secondary supply has been worked off, and investment vehicles like Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, which have come in and bought up essentially all the rest of the uncommitted uranium floating around in the market, has really now pointed for that new mine production to come. Some of it, in my opinion, even with the Canadian mines at full capacity, Kazakhstan producing 60 million pounds a year, I believe we need 8 to 10 additional new mines coming on in the second half of this decade. And as you know, it's not an overnight thing to license, permit, construct a uranium mine in this day and age. So it really comes to what is the incentive price for that to happen. I think it's also been impacted now by inflationary and the capex blowups that we've seen in other commodities in such a dramatic way. It wasn't that long ago that there was sort of a general assumption that at $50 a pound we'll see uranium mine developments resume again in earnest. Well, we're at $50 a pound today in the spot price, and we're not seeing that. I think it's closer to $60 a pound would be the threshold for the best mines in the world to move forward. I know in my own company's case with the ISR mines in the US at a $60 price, our costs and expected return certainly can allow us to move forward. But there's limited supplies that can come on at that level. I think you need higher thresholds, especially mines that need billion-dollar investments to move forward. We probably need a threshold higher than $60, could be $70, $80. So we have a very interesting supply squeeze developing here, where we're getting to the point now where uranium demand is fully recovered from Fukushima. We're increasing at 3 to 4% per year. These new reactors, both big and small, coming online. And so the gap is getting bigger. I think right now we consume globally around 200 million pounds a year for the world's 430 some reactors. We're only producing globally around 130, 140 million presently. So, even if we didn't have growth in reactors, we have a big gap to fill. But with growth and increasing demand curve, we really have a supply squeeze developing. And I think there's a consensus growing, and even utilities, have said out loud that they see a squeeze developing in 2024, 25, 26, and they must be coming to that conclusion in discussions with their suppliers and mining companies. And we all know that markets tend to get out ahead of the actual supply and demand. If it's evident there's a squeeze in 2024, I would expect more speculators, financial players, and utilities try to get out ahead of that and purchase whatever remaining inventories are available in the spot market before that time. So that would really bode for a very strong uranium market in 2023. Fully expect that. We're already seeing long-term contracting is back at very, very significantly high levels again. So utilities realize now it's time to really cover their needs. But a number of producers are really filling their order books with this increased long-term demand. And so it really gets to an interesting situation here in the next 3 years, where mines haven't had a chance to restart or come back into production, but demand still remains unfilled in those years. So again, $50 a pound is great. It's up from $17 a pound in 2016, but I think we're only in the first inning of this bull market in uranium.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. As the question that gets begged to be asked at this point is, as you know, there's a number of mines that are on care and maintenance due to low pricing. How quickly can those mines be brought back up online, and how much of that gap can those mines fill before we get to the stage where we need new mines?
Well, and that kind of brings me to the other hat that I wear is Uranium Royalty Corp, where we've launched the one and only royalty and streaming company in the uranium industry. And a big part of our job is to really scan the universe of uranium miners and developers and try to determine who has the best resources, management teams, balance sheets, geopolitical risk to be the movers in this cycle. And I think investors face the same decision. Okay, what will it take? And I think I would focus, if you're looking to invest in a company that is going to be producing and cash flowing in this cycle, you kind of have to limit yourself to mines that are currently on standby and may have been shut in because of the low uranium price and are restart of operations. And there's a number of great examples like that. UEC's mines in Texas and Wyoming, Langer Heinrich in Namibia. Obviously, Cameco's mines have restarted in Saskatchewan. So, but those are limited in nature, and a lot of their capacity is being filled under long-term contract. So if you look at what new mines are going to be built, I think you have to look at another category, which would be fully permitted and licensed mines. And that's significant because I think our history of licensing and permitting mines, whether it's UEC or my experience at Cameco, this is a 6, 7, 8, upwards of 10-year process to get mines licensed, permitted, and built. So if you already have gone through that permitting and licensing stage, and the decision to start up is purely commercial and in your control, they will also be, so some of the early beneficiaries of this bull market. And so there are additional mines that fit that category. But I think even with these first two categories, we're going to need initial new mine developments, and they may take a lot more upfront capital and lead time to make that happen. That's where it gets very interesting in the coming months and years.
Yeah. The other interesting bit of news that's happened in the last few weeks, we talked about Cameco restarting their Saskatchewan operations, but Cameco went out and actually bought themselves a nuclear reactor company in Westinghouse Power to go vertical into the marketplace. Do you see that as being a trend to the industry?
Well, I don't know if it's a trend. I mean, you have to be a company the size of Cameco to take on a commitment like that. But I would say there's no bigger bullish statement about nuclear power than one of the leading, if not the leading company in uranium mining in the world, fully understands global markets, have customers in every continent. For them to step up and make that kind of big investment in the reactor side really indicates where Cameco thinks the industry's headed. And so I think it was a real endorsement of where we're at with nuclear energy today. It's a very different investment than mining. I think to some degree it's, provides more steady, predictable cash flows, which may be attractive to Cameco. You have captive markets and customers and Westinghouse reactors that run on Westinghouse fuel. Obviously, they can leverage in uranium supply into those relationships. So there's clear synergies in that investment. So we really applaud what Cameco's doing there. I mean, I think the other side of the argument is that it does somewhat dilute from a pure play uranium producer. And I think we're seeing other investors, the investors that applaud this and will invest in Cameco because of this vertical integration. I think others will look to more pure uranium investments. And I think, Uranium Energy, speaking on our behalf, we intend to be all uranium all the time and provide that pure commodity exposure and not really dilute or confuse the valuation with some of the vertical integration that Cameco is doing. But listen, Cameco, I think, wants to be a global nuclear energy company, and they're very well on their way to that goal with this acquisition. So it's really a big development for our industry.
Yeah, when you get vertical integration, that's definitely bullish for everybody.
Yeah.
So if people want to follow you and learn more about what the Uranium Producers of America are up to, and the news is as this new nuclear age comes rolling out at us, how would they do so?
Yeah, like if you really want to be exposed to the nuclear energy story and uranium from the supply and demand fundamentals, I would really encourage you to look at our two companies. Uranium Energy Corp is UEC on the New York Stock Exchange. We trade 10 million shares a day, $1.5 billion market cap company, very pure focus on Texas, Wyoming, Saskatchewan uranium development and production. Would also encourage you to look at Uranium Royalty Corp, which is UROY on the NASDAQ exchange. We just rang the closing bell at NASDAQ 2 weeks ago. This is the only royalty and streaming company in the uranium space. If you love Franco-Nevada, Wheaton Precious, Sandstorm, Royal Gold, this is your uranium royalty investment. And so both those companies have websites, uraniumroyalty.com, uraniumenergy.com. Encourage you to take a look at those. And if there was ever a time to have uranium investments in your portfolio, this is it. I know we've always said you have to be patient with uranium investing. I think your patience now is going to be rewarded. And if you're waiting for a better entry point, I'm not sure you're going to get one. This is pretty exciting times as nuclear power really gains broad acceptance, and we really have a supply squeeze of uranium developing in the coming years.
Yeah, no, agree with you wholeheartedly. And I look forward to watching this roll out further. The opportunities in this sector are going to be endless, and we're going to be shaking our heads at some of the returns that people are going to see, I believe.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Totally.
thanks very much for joining me, and hopefully we'll have you back on another month or so with more exciting news like it's been broken in the last few weeks.
Excellent. Would be my pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. The Prospector News Podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.